So let's look at these examples where we need to convert each percentage to a decimal. And to convert percent to a decimal, we simply have to move decimal point 2 places to the left. So when I look at 66%, where's the decimal point? Well, it's not visible because it's a whole number, 66. But if I want to put a decimal point, then I have to place it after 66. So it still stays as 66, right? The whole number. So right here. Well, to convert 66% to a decimal, I have to take that decimal point and move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. 1, 2. And drop the decimal point. So what number will I get then? So that's the same as, so decimal point will be right in the front, so it's going to be right here, and then I'll have 66. And I no longer write percent because this is now a decimal. That's a decimal. Here I had percent, 66%, and now I'm looking at the decimal. So 2 places left. So next I have to convert 8% to a decimal. So I'll repeat the steps. I'll take 8, and in that number I'm going to move decimal point 2 places left. Now where is decimal point in 8? Well, it's right here after 8. Now I'm moving it 2 places left. 1, 2, and that's where I'm placing it. And now obviously I have an empty space here, so I'll use 0 as the placeholder, and the number becomes 0.08. So 8% converts to 0.08. And finally, let's convert 40% to a decimal. Same thing, we have to move decimal point 2 places left. Decimal point is right at the end since it's not visible. I am moving it 1, 2 places to the left, so that becomes 0.40, right? And we know that 0 at the end of the decimal part we don't have to keep, and I can rewrite it as 0.4. So 40% corresponds to 0.4. That is the corresponding decimal. And now let's try this backwards. So in other words, we're going to be given decimals, and we need to write them as percentages. And it's also not that hard because we're going to be moving the decimal point again, but the other direction. So before we had to move it left, right, to go from percentage to decimal. Now we have to move it to the right. So I'm going to take the decimal point and move it 2 places to the right. 1, 2. So now it's at the end of 86. I don't have any other digits after that, so I don't have to use decimal point. I don't have to write it, but that becomes percent. So 0.86, that decimal converts to 86%. So 2 places right. Let's try it for next one, which is 0.03. Decimal point is being moved 2 places to the right, and now it's at the end of 3. I don't need to write all the zeros in the front, so it just becomes 3%. That converts to 3%. And then finally, 0.6. Same thing, I have to move decimal point 2 places to the right. 1, 2, and that's where I place it. That means that I'm going to have 6, and then here, see how there's one more place, one more space, and there's no digit for it, so I have to use 0 as a placeholder. So it's going to be 6 and then 0 next to it. And after that, technically the decimal point has to be placed, but I don't have to write it there since it's the end of the number. So it becomes 60%. So decimal point 6 converts to 60%. And now let's learn how to write fraction as percentage. Well, we know that when we have a fraction with denominator 100, then that represents percent, right? That's actually how we define percent, divided by 100. So it means that when I see 17 over 100, well, that is the same as 17% by definition, right? So that's super easy. But how about when we don't have denominator 100? Let's say it's 10. What is 3/10 in terms of percentage? Well, then we would want to make denominator 100 before we perform conversion. So how do I make denominator 100 here? Well, since it's 10, it's pretty easy because I can just multiply 10 by 10 and that gives me 100, right? So now I have denominator 100. But remember that we cannot just multiply the denominator of the fraction. If we need to do so, well, then we also need to multiply the numerator as well to keep the same quantity. So that means that I'm going to have to write times 10 in the numerator. This means that the equivalent fraction is 30 over 100. Well, which is the same as 30 divided by 100, and that means that represents 30%. So if I go to where I started, then I'll say 3/10, the fraction 3/10 is the same as 30%. Let's try one more example. And I apologize for repeated letters here, but 4 over 5 is our next example. Now, same story, right? The denominator is not 100, so we're not ready to convert it to a decimal, but we can easily make denominator 100 if we multiply 5 by 20. Now, we know that since we have to multiply the denominator, it forces us to multiply the numerator. Otherwise, fraction changes. And the equivalent fraction becomes 5 times 20 is 100. And the numerator is 4 times 20, that's 80 over 100. Well, now 80 divided by 100 is the same as 80%. And our last example is 12 over 25. We already know what to do. 25 has to be multiplied by 4 to obtain 100, and that means that the numerator has to be multiplied by 4. So that becomes 48 over 100, which means that we're looking at 48%. So fraction 12 over 25 represents 48%.